Hi, Geoff. Welcome back. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges that you face doing research on football fans.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of challenges. There's no ethnography is not the perfect method. It has its own drawbacks, and there were a number of challenges which I came across. Firstly, very practically, particularly when I was doing covert research, was how I was actually going to record the data I was getting, because I couldn't get out a notepad and start making notes. I couldn't start talking into a dictaphone in front of my research participants. And of course, I wasn't willing to record them covertly. So that meant essentially I was taking notes after the event. That meant I couldn't get that sort of rich verbatim data that ethnography really thrives on, and that was one of the reasons why later on in my research I dropped the covert aspect of it and was more open and started to have those conversations on tape because it was data that was missing. There were also a few issues in terms of risk when you're engaged when you're doing research around sort of criminality and antisocial behaviour. There are very low risks of physical harm. I mean, generally football crowds are incredibly well regulated, incredibly well managed, and there isn't there isn't a high risk of getting seriously injured. But there's a risk of getting hit on the head by a bottle or hit by a police officer with a baton, particularly if you're travelling abroad with the English team. And there's also, of course, risks, legal risks. So, what happens if you get arrested, or what happens if somebody goes after a football banning order against you to try and restrict your movements. But in addition to the practical and those kind of issues, another issue to be aware of is what people tend to refer to as going native. The fact that when you're in the field for a certain amount of time, you may start to assume the biases of the research participants that you're with. And also that you're going to start to normalise behaviour that is actually interesting and should be of interest to a social researcher, but instead you normalise it and then you don't write it down. So that's a problem for anybody that's been in the field for a long time. And then there are finally ethical issues. So if you're doing covert research, be aware that you are deceiving people about your identity. You are actually spying on them. And, people don't like that for very good reasons. Also, if you're doing research around areas of criminality, you are likely, it's likely that you're going to see crimes being committed. Well, what should you do with that data? What should you do with that knowledge? If you know that there's two groups of fans that are going to be fighting, do you have a duty to the state to report this to the police, for example? What happens, for example, if in that fight, the unlikely happened and somebody was actually killed? How, as a researcher, would you feel that you hadn't passed on that information to the authorities? And then finally, of course, if you're doing covert research in areas of criminality, the likelihood is that you will be pressurised into committing criminal offences yourself. And you need to make the decision about, well, am I happy committing criminal offences just in order to get research data? Do the ends justify the means?
Yeah, speaking of that, in 2009 you wrote an article on that very topic about breaking the law whilst conducting field work. In retrospect and where you are right now in your career, do you feel like the approach you took was still justified?
Well, there were two reasons for using deception and using a covert approach. One was to avoid distorting the field, and the other was to actually gain access and maintain access in the field. Looking back on it now, I think the first of those still stands true. I think not distorting the field means that the data I got was more accurate, and to not distort the field, I essentially did have to join in with very minor criminal offences. However, at the time I made the decision, I think I got it wrong in terms of access to the field. I think in retrospect I could have got access to that particular field without using covert methods and without committing criminal offences. But the trouble is, at the time I was making the decision, I was 21 years old, I was just starting a PhD. I hadn't even started the research methods module at the university. And this is quite typical with PhD researchers, young academic researchers tend to have the time and the freedom to be able to do these sort of long-term immersive ethnographic projects, but at the same time they're not in the best position to make those decisions because they simply don't have the experience. And I think that's one of the problems in higher education generally. We can try and alleviate it through good supervision, through good ethics committees, but it's still essentially those big research decisions are being made by people that often don't have the experience to make them. And in retrospect, I don't think I got it 100% right.
Awesome. So just finally to kind of close the interview, I was just wondering what advice would you give to my students or to early career researchers generally about entering the field and doing ethnographic research?
Well, I think the first thing is that things have changed and moved on since I first went into the field. There are now very stringent research ethics frameworks, institutional ethics committees, and any student going in to do ethnographic research needs to get ethical approval. It's very important for practical reasons as well as academic reasons, because you have to think about issues like, well, if it goes wrong, who's going to be covering me in terms of insurance? The university will do, but only if you've got ethical approval through. So that's very, very important. If you're looking to do ethnographic research, have a think of that cost-benefit analysis. What is going to be the benefit of your research? And can you justify participant observation? Can you justify, for example, covert methods? Could you justify committing criminal offences in an extreme example? If the outcome justifies the means, then I would encourage any student to go and do ethnographic work. And there are some areas of society, particularly where groups are underprivileged or subject to an injustice or are suspicious of the authorities, where sometimes ethnographic work and participant observation and even covert methods are necessary. It's the only way you can get the data. And I do believe that in those cases, the means justify the ends. In terms of if you actually get the opportunity to go into the field, then I think try to record as much data as you can do. Don't assume you know what are going to be the interesting areas that you're going to want to talk about at the end of your research. And what you don't want to do is embark on a 6-month project and at the end of it think, oh God, I wish I had more data about this particular issue, but I didn't realise it was so important when I started, so I didn't take field notes on it. So try to record as much as you can, and obviously have a think about some way of coding your data so that you can go and find the relevant bits further down the line.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having a chat with us, and we look forward to seeing you in November down in Australia.
Me too.
See you later.